Greenwald is a political columnist for the UK's Guardian newspaper. He's with me here in the studio. So if this is going to be such a close election as so many people are predicting, can we have a situation that's happened before in US presidential races where the candidate who is elected in fact would have received fewer votes than his opponents? So essentially the person who wins loses the popular votes but wins the electoral college votes, that crucial 270 magic number.
Certainly, it just happened back in 2000 when George Bush was elected. There was that very tightly contested fight over the state of Florida, which eventually put Bush over the 270 mark, and yet he had almost 500,000 votes less than Al Gore in total. If you look at public opinion polls now, many of them have Mitt Romney slightly ahead on the popular vote total while behind in the electoral college, so it's certainly possible that the next president could have fewer votes than the loser.
And Obama is still out campaigning as hard as he can. Lots of volunteers are out there going door to door to get voters to go to the polls on election day. He has, though, disappointed much of his base, hasn't he? Many of the young voters who were so enthused by Obama 4 years ago seem to have been somewhat disillusioned, disappointed. Does he face the risk of losing this election if he loses out on that young vote that he so effectively stimulated 4 years ago?
Absolutely. This is the big danger for Obama, and if you talk to Democrats, it's why they're very afraid, despite those polls that you began by talking about. The polls only ask people who you prefer, which candidate you prefer. It doesn't demonstrate who's going to go to the polls. In order to get out of bed and get out of your house and go wait in line, you have to be very enthused about voting for your candidate. That's how he won in 2008. It's not just young voters, but lots of minorities and other progressives as part of his base who are very disenchanted with him as well, and whether they'll actually be bothered to go out and vote is the big question mark, I think.
How much work will the campaigns be doing to get every single vote within the minority communities, the so-called Latino vote, which isn't all that uniform, is it? I mean, in places like Florida, you've got Cubans, Mexicans, Colombians who've got very different interests, very different concerns, and who don't necessarily vote in a block for the same people. No?
Well, that's right. It's a complicated issue who you get out to vote, but it's also the case that that's a perfect example, which is that Latinos backed Obama overwhelmingly in 2008. Public opinion polls show that overwhelmingly they support him again, but they've been extremely disappointed with him because he's done almost nothing on the issue of immigration until in the last few months when it was clear that he was politically motivated and did some important things. But Latino voters are very disillusioned with President Obama, and how much they're willing to go turn out in key states like Florida will, I think, be a major factor in determining the outcome.
You've written extensively as well on civil liberties and national security issues in the US. Is that an issue that Obama stands to lose quite a few votes on because of what he has or hasn't done in the last 4 years?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think it's the number one issue by any means, but if you look at what the centerpiece of his campaign was running in 2008, it was very much about uprooting and reversing the extreme and radical measures of George Bush and Dick Cheney in the Muslim world in terms of civil liberties and militarism. And in many instances, not only has he failed to do that, he's actually become worse. And I think that's a significant, not the number one or number two, but a significant part of why so many of his voters who supported him so actively in 2008 are now very disillusioned.
He's in fact expanded some of these very unpopular George W. Bush policies. What will help undecideds, do you think, make up their minds so late in the game?
I mean, the mind of the undecided voter is one of the world's great mysteries. I think it used to be perceived that undecided voters were these very wise and philosophical people who sat around pondering the political issues of the day. And now I think it's widely recognized what the truth is, which is that undecided voters really don't care much about politics. They don't know very much about politics, and they tend to rely on their gut, on intuition. The big advantage is that Obama is much more likable personally than Mitt Romney, but at the same time, undecided voters may decide at the end that they don't like the way the country is going economically, and that it's just simply time for a change.
Is this going to go down to the wire? Which states do you think will determine the outcome?
Clearly, Ohio is the most important state. No Republican has ever won without winning Ohio, and I think it's perceived accurately that if Obama wins Ohio, it'll be almost impossible for Mitt Romney to win.
And it represents the wider country, doesn't it?
Absolutely.